Hey y'all, I'm Cal. Let's get messy. Hey y'all, welcome back. So, I want to start today out with a question. How exhausted are you from trying to be someone else? I'm talking about that bone deep tiredness that comes from spending years, maybe even decades, trying to shapeshift into something that is diametrically opposed to every single piece of your being. Trying to be less sensitive, less loud, more social, better at small talk, more productive, less emotional, more normal, whatever that is, and whatever version of yourself you think the world wants you to be. Today is very personal for me. It's the 23-year anniversary of my father's passing, and he was only 55, just a few years older than I am now. But it's also the day I'm releasing my book, What If They're Wrong About You? Discovering Hope When You've Always Felt Different. And I chose this timing very intentionally, because sometimes I've realized recently, over the last couple of years, that our biggest struggles aren't always problems to be solved. Oftentimes they're gifts that we haven't yet recognized. And sometimes the thing everyone or even just you keeps telling you that you need to fix is actually what makes you extraordinary. What if you've been asking the wrong questions your whole life? I know I have. What if instead of what's wrong with me, the question is, what if nothing's wrong with me? So let's get into it. And this first part might be a little bit controversial, but I believe that our culture's obsession with self-improvement is making us sick. Everywhere you look, someone's telling you to be a new version of yourself and finding a way to sell you that version. Transform your life in 30 days. Become the person you were meant to be. Optimize everything. And if you're not constantly improving, grinding, becoming a shinier, more productive, more socially acceptable version of yourself, then you're failing, right? But what I've learned after 50 years of trying to transform myself was I didn't need to transform anything. I was just trying to be somebody that I was never meant to be. I spent decades trying to become someone who didn't ask too many questions or the wrong questions, who wasn't too loud, who could handle workplace toxicity and bullying without falling apart. And you know what happened? I burned out so completely that all I wanted every single day was just to not wake up the next day. And that was unsustainable. So 2 of my biggest insecurities, aside from my weight, and I'm sure I've talked about them before. In fact, I know I have at least one of them, are my inability to communicate verbally, and as well as society expects and rewards, but also my difficulty understanding abstract concepts, right? Without a detailed explanation or a visual or fully understanding the system. I have a very hard time picturing abstract concepts. I've taken courses on the speech, I've watched videos, I've gotten coaches on speaking, and I still struggle with it. So I asked myself, what if I just decided to be okay with that? What if instead of beating myself up about that, I focused on what actually matters? Like put my energy towards healing my relationship with my children, making amends for past wrongs, finding ways to serve others, using my strengths instead of obsessing over my weaknesses. And I got to have coffee the other day with an old friend. I haven't seen him in maybe 10 years. And in that time, we both discovered our autism, which I started thinking about that. That might explain why I always liked him so much and was so comfortable around him, but that's neither here nor there. But I explained to him my difficulty understanding abstract concepts. And he is highly intelligent and very knowledgeable about many things that I'm struggling with right now in running my business, specifically communication, marketing, that sort of thing. And so I just flat out told him, look, I need specifics on these things you're helping me with. I don't need abstract talking points and vague concepts. I need who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? I need the details. And he totally understood. And he communicated what he was trying to share with me in a way that I could understand. But what if I had just sat there nodding and pretending that I understood what he was talking about at first without speaking up? Who would that have served? It would have been a waste of his time, number one. Even if he had been the hostile, bullying type that I've encountered all too often, the type to talk down to you, and it's almost like they want you to feel stupid for asking questions. Even if he had been that type and I hadn't spoken up, he wouldn't have had the chance to course correct, right? If I hadn't been honest about my difficulty with these things just because I'm insecure about them, I would have walked out of there no smarter than when I walked in. So by asking, what if it's okay that I learn and understand differently than others rather than why am I like this? I had the courage to speak up for myself, and we both walked away better for the conversation. The verbal communication, all the work I've put in. What if this is the best it's ever going to get, and what if that just has to be okay? What if I just accept that this is who I am, this is how I talk, this is a struggle for me, and focus on improving things that I'm already good at rather than destroying myself over a deficit that doesn't really impact my daily life, right? And this book, these things, they apply to all of us, not just neurodivergent folks. How many of you have been told you're too sensitive or too emotional or too much in some ways but not enough in others? How much energy are you spending trying to be like someone else instead of trying to be more like yourself, right? And so I dig into that a lot in the book. Goes much deeper into how to distinguish between, what actually needs fixing and what society or ourselves, to be honest, just tells us is wrong. And so the thing about asking what's wrong with me, it assumes you're the problem. It assumes you're a problem. It keeps you trapped in a story where you're fundamentally flawed and everyone else has it figured out, which couldn't be further from the truth. But we get stuck in these mental loops that keep us asking the same unproductive questions over and over, whether it's overcompensating for insecurities or believing what we've been taught about ourselves, or feeling like we have to optimize every minute of every day because of what society tells us, or falling into a victimhood mentality where everything happens to us instead of for us. And I just learned we miss so many possibilities, so many different paths that we could take, all because we're stuck asking questions that lead nowhere. My father used to say very matter-of-factly, I won't live to be that old, when I would, talk about something that would be going on when he was 65. Oh, can you imagine when you're 65? I won't live to be that old. And I've always felt the same way. I've always had that same intuition about my own timeline. And I know that's morbid to a lot of people, and my family hates it when I say that and when I talk about it, and I get a lot of, you don't know when you're going to die and yada, yada, yada. And that is absolutely the truth. But I do think that some people just sense the shape of their stories, right? And so I often wonder if maybe that's why I finally had the courage to stop asking why me and start asking what if. What if my sensitivity isn't weakness but wisdom? Or what if my need for clarity isn't being difficult but just how I do a better job at whatever I'm doing? What if all of those years of feeling different weren't preparation for a breakdown but preparation for something I couldn't see yet? And so the whole book is filled with these reframes, practical ways to shift from questions that keep you stuck to questions that open up possibilities. Because I firmly believe that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask. And so let's talk about something that affects everyone nowadays, because I've said it just in last week's podcast. You see it everywhere, toxic workplaces. I had a boss who systematically destroyed my confidence over 2 years. The praise to punishment cycle, the gaslighting, the micromanagement towards the end disguised as support. She interrogated me for medical appointments and all sorts of things. And what I wish someone had told me well before that, workplace toxicity isn't happening because you're weak. It targets people who care, people who go above and beyond, people who will absorb abuse because they believe they have to earn basic human decency. And it's not just neurodivergence. But when you are neurodivergent or highly sensitive or have a disability, it hits differently. It just does. We're already using massive amounts of energy just to function in environments that are nowhere near designed for how our brains work. And when that environment becomes hostile, it's not just stressful, it can literally break you. And it broke me. I never thought I would get there, but it broke me. I know what you're thinking. I need income. I need insurance. I need stability. I stayed so much longer than I should have for those exact reasons. But here's some tough love. What if the stability you're clinging to is actually destroying your ability to build real stability in your life, right? Your job is not worth your mental health, ever. End of story. Period. And so what I want to say to you about this situation before I move on, if you're in a toxic workplace right now and you have taken all of the advice on how to fix it and you've done your part to make sure that, you're maintaining your ethics and integrity, but it still continues, you're not the problem. And more than likely, it's not going to change. You don't need to be stronger. You don't need to be more resilient. You don't need to put up with it. You need to get out. Whatever that looks like for you. For me, it was getting out with no backup plan because I hadn't made one yet. I was working on one, but it wasn't complete, but I had no choice. And that's what it means sometimes, walking away without a backup plan and figuring it out, because I would rather spend my time figuring it out than figuring out how to just want to wake up in the morning, right? So I share that, the full story of that, in the book, how I finally left and what I learned about, rebuilding from that, because I think it takes a lot of courage to save yourself. And so one reason, though, I think we need fixing is because we're carrying around wounds that aren't even ours. Generational trauma is real, and most of us are walking around with inherited patterns we didn't choose, right? My father and I were never close, but we were so much alike. And maybe that's why we clashed. Maybe he saw in me pieces of himself that he didn't like. But I've learned that inherited patterns aren't just about trauma. They're about gifts, My dad, he was a radio DJ. He had a voice like silk, y'all. It was beautiful. He was a beautiful writer. He could tell beautiful, fantastic stories just right off the top of his head. He could make you split your side laughing. He was just an all-around great guy. I thought I hadn't inherited any of those gifts because I struggled with verbal communication. But truthfully, his words live on in mine, just differently, right? His understanding of time's preciousness drives my, I guess you'd call it, urgency to live now rather than make excuses or wait for tomorrow. One thing I worried about when writing about some of my childhood experiences in the book, sexual abuse and neglect, was that my parents would be perceived as not caring for us or loving us or taking care of us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is, my parents were baby boomers, raising us in a generation we didn't talk about problems. You just didn't talk about it. Again, sexual abuse, mental health, family dysfunction. All of that was swept under the rug, not just by them, but well before them. That it was generational. They learned it. That's what you did. And so they did the best they could with the tools they had, right? But we've swung to the other extreme. Helicopter parenting has produced a generation that can't handle basic life challenges, and there has to be a balance. So what if we can acknowledge the trauma without staying stuck in it? What if we can protect our children without making them helpless? What if we can talk about hard things while still building resilience, without becoming a victim. And so the book explores some of that, breaking generational cycles, without throwing away the gifts, how to heal without becoming the victim of your own story. And forgiveness. Real forgiveness isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about recognizing that we're all working with limited tools, doing the best we can with what we know at the time. My father loved me. He loved me with all he had to love me with. Yes, maybe I wanted more, but what if the way he loved me was enough? What if it is exactly how much I needed from him? He gave me his creativity, even if he couldn't give me his attention. He modeled the power of words, even if he couldn't speak the words I needed to hear, even if I didn't inherit that ability to flow it from here to here as beautifully as he did. What if the distance between us wasn't rejection, but protection? His way of ensuring I'd find my own voice instead of echoing his because he saw so much of himself in me. And when we talk about forgiveness, that includes forgiving ourselves. How much energy do we spend carrying guilt about past mistakes? How many years will we punish ourselves for not knowing then what we know now, instead of taking what we know now and doing better going forward? Most of us are just doing the best we can with what we know at the time. And so if you're struggling with complicated family relationships or old guilt, the book offers a framework for forgiveness that, it doesn't require you to minimize your pain or excuse bad behavior. And so about ourselves, the most important relationship probably that we'll ever have, because who is with us from birth to death? Ourselves, right? And for many of us, for most of us, that relationship is so badly damaged. We talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to a friend. We hold ourselves to standards we'd never apply to anyone else. We apologize for just being in the room or for having needs or for being human. And I think repairing this relationship with ourselves starts with learning to distinguish our own voices from the critical voices we've internalized. Your voice can ask questions. The critical voice is going to make statements. Your voice can be curious. The critical voice is going to be condemning. And so learning to trust your own experience, your own instincts, it's huge in a world that is profiting from all of our self-doubt. So what if you're allowed to be exactly as you are right now? What if that's enough? What if you don't have to be perfect to be worthy? What if you don't have to have it all figured out right here, right now, today? So the book is full of practical exercises for rebuilding that relationship with yourself, for learning to hear your own voice above all of the noise of everyone else's expectations, or the expectations that you've placed on yourself that are unrealistic and not aligned with who you are, who you really are. So what I want to leave you with, I said it before and I'll say it again, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions you ask. So ask yourself, instead of what's wrong with me, what if nothing is wrong with me? Instead of, why can't I be normal? Try, what if I am normal and just nobody talks about these things? Instead of, why is this so hard? Try, what if this is hard for everyone and I'm just more honest about it? Instead of, what if I fail? Try, what if I learn something valuable? And these aren't just word games. These are different neural pathways that you're creating, different ways of engaging with uncertainty, different relationships with possibility. And I have a whole science chapter in the book that talks about this. It's not toxic positivity. It's literally rewiring your brain. Every what if question in my book, for me, carries a piece of my father's legacy. His understanding that some things just are, and our job isn't to understand why, but to figure out what to do next. So, what if they're wrong about you? Discovering Hope When You've Always Felt Different. It's available now on Amazon. I'll link it below. And I wrote this book for me, but I also wrote it for everyone who's ever felt like they just don't quite fit, who's always felt like they're too much or not enough, or just who is absolutely exhausted from trying to be someone they're not. If you're tired of asking what's wrong with me and ready to start asking, what if I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be right now? I invite you to read the book because it's not about fixing yourself, because chances are you don't need fixing, or at least not every piece of you does. It's about asking better questions, healing what actually needs healing, giving yourself the permission to be genuine, to be you. If anything I've shared today resonates with you, the book goes much deeper. It's filled with practical tools and personal stories and, frameworks for reframing your relationship with being different. It's the resource I needed when I was sitting in that burnout basement, wondering if life would ever be worth living again. Today, 23 years after my father's death, I'm choosing to believe that our stories aren't just about us. Sometimes our deepest struggles prepare us for our greatest contributions, and that the little girl who felt so unseen by her father could grow up to help other people feel seen. Because I truly believe that legacy isn't just what we leave behind, it's what we pick up and carry forward. And maybe asking different questions will lead you somewhere beautiful too. So, thanks for listening. What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be? And what if it's enough? I hope you have a great week, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope you'll check out the book. And I don't have anything else to say. Love you. Bye.